A much more celebratory occasion, but we all know why we're here, to discuss racism and xenophobia in the wake of COVID-19. This is an unprecedented moment in history, and people are scared. Many are hurt, angry, and looking for a scapegoat. And for many the world over, for the reasons we've all heard, the scapegoats have become Asian people. When I go out with my kids, I find myself speaking English so much more loudly and clearly behind my mask. I've even received a number of ugly and hateful messages on my social media, even wishing harm on my own children. But there have been countless people who've been physically attacked and harmed, including young children, many women, and elderly people. Even Asian healthcare workers treating COVID have reported instances of harassment. But perhaps the most tragic story in all of this is how the virus has exposed devastating mortality rates and unequal treatment along ethnic lines. To talk more about what we can do about it, we've assembled a very passionate panel of guests who have spent their lives and careers advocating for people. We have Congressman Ted Lieu of the 33rd Congressional District in California. He's my congressman, who's been vocal in speaking out against the rise of anti-Asian xenophobia, including his own personal experiences. Stewart Kwoh, founding president and executive director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice in Los Angeles, the nation's largest Asian American legal and civil rights organization. Max Sevillia, Vice President, Government Relations, Advocacy, and Community Engagement for the Anti-Defamation League. And we have Van Jones, one of the most important voices in America today. He's the CEO of Reform Alliance and a CNN host and commentator and social justice warrior who's been speaking out on how COVID has wreaked devastation on communities of color in particular. Welcome, everyone. Stewart, I want to start with you. On the Asian Americans Advancing Justice homepage, you ask for stories of hatred in an effort to track hate. What kind of response have you been receiving?
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Asia Society, for hosting this very important event. We have received overwhelming support. In just a little over a month, we've had 140 reports of violence and incidents of hate around the United States. We've also, we have a website called Stand Against Hatred. We've joined with about 5 other groups, for example, Stop API Hate, which has collected many thousands of reports around the United States. So altogether, we have collected over 1,600 incidents of hate just in about 2.5 months. And these are maybe 2/3 verbal attacks, but over 10% are physical attacks, and they're happening all around the United States. So this is reminiscent of the Chinese Exclusion Act period, of the incarceration of Japanese Americans. This is very serious.
And Congressman Lieu, you also have been the target of online racist taunts. How have you handled it? And can you tell us about any legislative efforts that have been introduced to combat the xenophobia?
Thank you, Lisa, for your question and for moderating this panel. It's an honor for me to be here with the Asian Society and all the amazing panelists. And regarding your question, ever since as a kid till now, I routinely will get comments every now and then from people telling me to go back to China or to Japan or to Korea. And if you look at my social media feed, I get quite a few people responding that make racist comments. I think it's important for all of us to speak up and really have people across America understand this issue. This pandemic has affected all Americans, but many don't walk around thinking about hate crimes or thinking about discrimination. But once you explain it to them, then a light bulb goes off in their heads and they understand the issue that Asian Americans are facing. It's one reason I wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post last month criticizing the president for using the term Chinese virus. And because there was a lot of pushback from organizations and groups and individuals, the president has been using that term less. So we do see an effect of public sentiment in pushing back against things that the president says that should not be said.
Yes, he says we need to protect our Asian Americans, but we all know that so much damage has already been done. Max, the ADL has been fighting anti-Semitism and other forms of discrimination for over 100 years. So given this history of fighting against discrimination, what are some of the best practices you can share about confronting the current situation of hate mongering?
Thanks, Lisa, for your question. I want to thank also the Asian Society of Southern California for the opportunity to participate in this panel. So indeed, ADL is 107 years old. It's actually founded in 1913 to fight anti-Semitism, but also all kinds of hate. And we are certainly seeing the same sort of xenophobia, racism, anti-Semitism, discrimination that others have spoken about so far. We are equally seeing a surge of incidents of bias and harassment against not just the Asian American community, but also immigrants and Latinos and the Orthodox Jewish community. ADL has 25 offices around the country. And so one thing that we've done is we prioritize partnerships with these and other communities. And so we are very much working not just in the nation's capital, where I lead the government affairs team, but also in each one of these 25 offices in partnership with other organizations locally to confront what we're seeing. And let me talk about two initiatives specifically where I think that there's lots of opportunity for cooperation. One is that for many decades, ADL has been gathering data about anti-Semitism incidents. We have been tracking trends, offering recommendations to the public, and engaging with law enforcement. Very early on, I did a press conference with Congresswoman Chu and other members of Congress on the issue of the responsible language that elected officials were using and how that language was leading to discriminatory incidents. But the information, the best practices that ADL has gathered, we have made it available to our partner organizations. This is something that we need to fight together. And so the best practices, the opportunities for partnership, for allyship, really, really important. The other initiative that I wanted to touch on is ADL. About 5 years ago, we put a lot of resources into creating the Center for Technology and Society out of Silicon Valley. And we are very much focused on hate speech online. And that's something that as we speak about incidents of discrimination, of actual physical violence, we are seeing multiples of tens in terms of what's happening online. And particularly as people are sheltering at home, they are espousing their hate mongering online with reach that really has no bounds, that expands to the entire world. So the projects, initiatives that ADL is leading in terms of confronting hate speech, that's another opportunity for partnership and to work in allyship with other communities, certainly with the Asian American community.
You're so right, Max. It's been reported by multiple sources that bullying of Asians online has increased like 900%. So appreciate your expertise on this. Van, you have so much on your plate right now. You have been relentlessly advocating for those in communities of color who've suffered the most from COVID, particularly inside the US prison system. Why is this issue of racism against Asians so important to you?
Well, first of all, the virus itself is trying to teach us something about wellness and about oneness. We've not taken wellness seriously enough. And so we have communities where people were already sick, a pandemic jumping on top of an epidemic. So in poor communities, Black communities, brown communities, Native American communities, you already had people who were sick. We hadn't taken wellness seriously enough there because our systems have been sick. And so we're called now to heal people and to heal systems. The other thing is this idea of oneness. We had begun to convince ourselves, some of us, that other human beings were just apps with feet under them. We could just poke these devices and suddenly a product shows up or a service shows up, and we didn't have to worry, well, did the human being who came to my door, were they paid well? they see a doctor if they got sick. These weren't, we just all apps. Well, it turns out that we do have to, the virus has a different view. The virus jumps from body to body to body to body, doesn't care your income, doesn't care your race, doesn't care who you voted for. And if that person coming to my door, if they aren't well, I'm not going to be well. And so suddenly the virus is telling us wellness matters, oneness matters, healing matters. Well, if we don't learn that lesson and all come together and try to help each other and heal each other and recognize each other's pain and each other's promise is all interrelated, we're likely not to learn the lesson of this virus, number one. So just universally. But number two, breakdowns can become breakthroughs if we use them right. The Asian community has been an extraordinary gift to this country. Each individual person, if you think about the Asian people in your life, they're often the best people in your life. The people who have done extraordinarily well at the job, done well on the campus, you rely on. The Asian people in your life are some of the best people in your life who have been there for you. And so when you have a community of people who are literally just innocent victims of nonsense, who have contributed so much and so selflessly and so excellently, it's a double violation not to stand up. Because this is about oneness. This is about all of us in this together. This is about we all need each other. That's what it's about. And then for one group to be singled out and picked on and mistreated, it's just not acceptable. And so, I think it is actually not well known that this is happening. I think if you are Asian, you are very aware of it. I think if you're not, it comes as a shock, because unless you're an idiot, the idea that you're going to pick on any individual group for a global pandemic makes no sense. And so you suddenly realize, oh my God, this is going on. So I think it's important for people who are not Asian to say, I'm not going to live in a country where the fight to stop a virus, which requires absolute unity, is being turned into a fight against individual people, which is about absolute division. That's actually the path for the virus to win. And as the same way the virus is going from body to body to body with no respect to race, our movement has to go from heart to heart to heart to heart with no respect to any of these other divisions either. We got to be at least as smart as this virus. And that's why I'm here.
Thank you so much for that beautiful statement, Van. I mean, you know as well as I know that idiocy can be very loud. There are a lot of them out there, and they have a bully pulpit. So, Stewart, tell me about the strategies that your organization, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, are focused on right now.
Thank you, Lisa. I think that we really need a broad strategy because the stabbings, the spitting, the name calling are so broad and so across the board in the United States. We have to have a broad strategy. So I'll just briefly mention the 3 prongs to the strategy that we think is very important. Number one, we have to resist the attacks. We have to track them. We have to help the victims. We have to, as Van was saying, we have to build coalitions. I reached out to SEIU, the largest union in the United States, 2 million members. They said they would join us to stop the hate. We have to reach out to African Americans, Pacific Islanders, Latinos, American Indians who are disproportionately impacted by the virus, and we have to support each other. It's not good enough just to say, support us because Asians are being attacked. We also have to lend concrete support to those who are being literally killed by the virus. The second prong of our strategy is we have to fight the common enemy and uplift what Asian Americans are doing, not as exceptions, but we join all Americans. We are in the front lines as grocery store workers, as nurses, as doctors, as researchers. Asia Society, the Committee of 100 are donating many PPEs to hospitals around the country. We need to uplift that so people know what role we're playing in 2020. The third is I think Asia Society and others can spread the best practices from the Asian countries, which went through this first, and spread that message throughout the United States. One example, in late March, we were told everybody should wear a face mask. In Asia, they wore face masks in January, and they told the United States, you all should wear face masks, not just people who are sick. The last thing I'll say is we're trying to bring this all together. And in May 11th and 12th, we're having a 5-hour documentary on Asian Americans on PBS. We're in charge of the curriculum, but we think that's a wonderful way of educating our young people and older people about the challenges and contributions that Asian Americans are making to the United States.
And Max, how has the ADL been responding to the rise of racism directed toward Asians? How specifically?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So very similar to what Stewart just mentioned, we believe wholeheartedly that we need to pull together now more than ever to stand up against anti-Semitism and all forms of extremism and discrimination. ADL, for example, we recently led a statement by over 200 Jewish communal organizations urging political leaders and all Americans to treat COVID-19 pandemic. And we said, as a moment of kindness and solidarity, and to make extra efforts to reach towards one another in support, not look to blame or scapegoat. And this was an important statement because it came from a really broad spectrum of Jewish organizations, but more importantly, because we use that as a tool to confront national lawmakers and decision makers with the sort of engagement and language that they were using. And it was successful in pushing back. We have also engaged our supporters about the discrimination related to Asian Americans with regards to COVID-19. And for example, we've been hosting similar webinars to the one we're doing today. Today we're calling it Fighting Hate from Home. And we had the chairwoman of the Congressional Asia Pacific American Caucus about a month ago talk about the sort of incidents of discrimination that were occurring in her district and around the country. And actually this week on Thursday, we are hosting leaders of the African American community in order to make the point and inform our supporters with regards to the disproportionate impact that the pandemic is having on the African American community. And we are doing the same with regards to Latinos and immigrants. And we are thinking forward of other groups that we need to show up for, show solidarity, and really be proactive in our efforts to look for partnerships. And I'll be remiss if I don't mention one thing that we're tracking. So we at ADL are very concerned that as the crisis continues, and should the economic effects of this crisis actually worsen, we believe are thinking that there will likely be an uptick of racism and scapegoating, particularly as we inch closer to the presidential election. So the work that we're doing today is critical, but it's also essential to building the muscle in order to confront the future racism and scapegoating that is likely to come and potentially even be worse than what we're seeing today, which is already incredibly worrisome.
Max, that brings me to my next question to Congressman Lieu. This is an election year, as Max just said, and it's inevitable that China is likely to become a chief foe for both parties. How will that affect Asian Americans?
That's a great question. So what China did at the very beginning is not defensible. They suppressed information about the virus. They did not disclose what was happening. So we can't defend that. Now, at the same time, when the president uses terms like Chinese virus, that then can have an effect on Americans who happen to be of Asian descent. And we know that the Asian Pacific Policy and Planning Council, who has been tracking hate crimes, they said that after the president used that term, there's a surge of 650 hate crimes that week. So we need to separate the difference between the Chinese government and also what could happen to Asian Americans in the United States when some of this rhetoric gets out of hand. And it is a nuance, but it's a very important nuance. I am an American Congress member. I do not represent China or Chinese foreign nationals. I represent Americans of all races, including Chinese Americans and Asian Americans. And so we do have to draw that fairly bright line. But we do know that when this rhetoric gets out of hand and there's intense xenophobia, then there is a blowback on Asian Americans. And we've seen this happen repeatedly throughout our history, from the Yellow Peril hysteria to Chinese Exclusion Act to internment of Japanese Americans to the murder of Vincent Chen. So this is simply part of our history. We have to be able to fight back against it. And this pandemic, I think Van stated it very well. We have to fight it with unity and with oneness, not through division.
Well, Congressman Lieu, you talk about how indefensible it was for China not to have been transparent about the disease. So as Asian Americans, particularly as Chinese Americans, what should the responsibility be to call out things like that, to call out injustices, human rights abuses, even racism in China?
I think the United States has an obligation to call out when countries do wrong, regardless of what that country is, whether it's China or Russia or another country. At the same time, we have to make sure the language doesn't bleed over and affect Asian Americans. So there's a difference between saying a virus came from China versus calling it the Chinese virus. You're attaching an adjective to a virus that already has an official name as well as an unofficial name. It's COVID-19 or coronavirus. And for some of those folks in America to use language that is ethnic or injects ethnicity into this pandemic, that is something that could affect Asian Americans. But we do have to also hold countries accountable if they do wrong. And so in Congress, I'm sure there will be commissions and committees will be looking into what happened. But right now, the most important thing is trying to deal with the emergency of a global pandemic, including this pandemic in the United States. And the best way to do that is through unity. It's also basic things like getting PPE and testing ramped up into scale. And we have to rely on other countries for help. So right now, China is a supplier of PPE. It doesn't make a lot of sense to antagonize a supplier of PPE when our frontline responders need it. So I think for the moment, we just have to make sure we all work together, overcome this crisis. There's going to be more than enough time to look back at what happened and how we can prevent it from happening again in the future.
Van, this crisis has put a major spotlight on the grave social inequities that exist in this country, particularly in Black and Brown communities. What needs to be done to address these issues, and how can the Asian community help?
Well, again, we're facing a pandemic jumping on top of multiple epidemics. And from a health point of view, I have hypertension and high blood pressure myself. It is epidemic in the Black community because of a lot of historical reasons and just the stress of being Black, frankly, but also some cultural and dietary reasons and lack of ability to get good health care in the community. So we have an epidemic of obesity, of hypertension, asthma, and other issues. So people should be aware that for us, this is not an issue affecting mainly old people. In the Black community, you have people dying in our 50s, 40s, 30s, and even 20s. Because of the underlying health issues. And so it's a very different situation to be Black. Being on Facebook is like watching a drive-by shooting every few hours because so many African Americans are dying. So it's every few hours someone's posting about someone who they knew who they've lost. It's a huge blow to our community. Also, in the Native American community, the Navajo right now are being just ravaged. Kind of like reminiscence of smallpox for them. They have their own historical trauma with regard to viruses. And New York, New Jersey, and Navajo territory are being hit first and worse, but still no real response to what's going on in tribal land. So there's a lot there. I also have to speak a word about what's happening in our prisons. There's a tendency to say, oh my God, the prisoners, who cares? They committed crimes. I can't figure out how to get toilet paper. I don't know how to educate my kids. So I'm talking about criminals. This is the attitude that's going to make it very difficult to defeat this virus. What we have to remember is, for three reasons, we all have to care about this. Number one, the US has the biggest prison population in the history of the world, 2.4 million people. 25% of all prisoners on Earth are US prisoners. So we have a massive prison population. The virus moves through a prison population at 15 times the rate of a normal population, which means that 2.4 million people are getting sick faster than everybody else. Why do we care? Number one, you could have, the 7,000 jails and prisons becoming morgues from coast to coast, a humanitarian catastrophe. Nobody in the US was sentenced to die from a virus. And let's not forget, a lot of people are in jail because they just can't afford bail. They have minor charges, probation violations, and yet they're sitting there in harm's way. But number two, the guards have to come in and out. Food services has to go in and out. Other staff in and out, which means the virus goes in and out. You cannot defeat the plague on the outside of a prison unless you defeat it on the inside. And you can now do a heat map of Ohio for the virus and determine where the jails and prisons are, because that's where the hot spots are now. And so the virus is now, the prisons and jails are now super accelerating the virus. Number three, you got human beings dying. That's bad enough. Number two, communities, are also going to be affected. But number three, math matters. If 2.4 million people get sick 10 times faster than everybody else, they're going to overflow the hospitals. You only got 30,000 hospital beds. You'll knock out the hospitals, and then you can't go to the hospital. So oneness. This virus is telling us that there's no away. There's no those people over there and us over here. There's nobody to point the finger at. There's nobody to scapegoat. There's nobody to abandon. We're all in this together. And so whether you're talking about people in housing projects, homeless shelters, jails, prisons, detention centers, women's shelters, reservations, those people we haven't thought about very much will be the very places this virus stages comeback after comeback until we pull everybody in and figure out compassionate release and figure out ways to help and support. So that's why, for me, it's so important. And that spirit of oneness is the best antidote against the spirit of hatred. We've got to really understand that we're all in this together. That will protect the Asian community and so many other communities, and that's why I'm proud to be a part of this effort.
Congressman Lieu, I wanted to ask you about that. Right now, many states are starting to relax stay-at-home orders, and it's possible we may see another wave of deaths imminently. So what is being done to try and safeguard communities of color from being further targeted by the disease?
That's a great question. So this pandemic has affected all Americans, but certain groups have been affected disproportionately. So we know that Blacks, Latinos, Pacific Islanders, and Native Americans have much higher death rates. We know those who live in poverty have much higher death rates. The LA Times recently reported that for people who are in poverty in Los Angeles County, they had a 3 times higher chance of dying from COVID-19. So we have to make sure that we deliver healthcare for everyone. We've been pushing the Trump administration to open enrollment again for the Affordable Care Act. So far, they've refused. But I do believe Abraham Lincoln had it right when he said public sentiment is everything. With it, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. So if we get more of the public to push the administration to do more on healthcare, we might see a reopening of enrollment. We also have to make sure that we get the PPE and testing to all communities. And to really get out of this crisis, to reopen safely, we need to do 3 things. We need to ramp up testing, we need to do tracing, and then we need to isolate. So testing, tracing, and isolation, none of that is at scale right now. And so when you see states reopening, what's going to end up happening is you're just going to get more COVID-19 cases. It's going to result in more illnesses and more death. So hopefully we can ramp up testing, tracing, and isolation before most of the states start reopening.
I have a question from someone who's watching. What, if anything, have we learned from heinous incidents such as Charlottesville and hate crimes that transpired at the Pittsburgh synagogue and at the El Paso shopping mall with respect to the right-wing white supremacist movement in order to push back on attacks against the Asian American community before things terribly escalate? Max, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that question. So with Charlottesville and El Paso, what we saw is, again, the need for all of us to come together, and the need to be conscious and fearful of extremist elements within society, not to ignore them because they're loud but a small minority, but rather to confront them. ADL has made a priority confronting extremism. And one of the priorities that we've had for both Congress and the administration is to take serious the threat of domestic extremism. We are beginning to see some worrisome signs related to COVID-19 and extremism. So, for example, when there have been rallies in front of state capitals or city halls pushing or calling for the reopening of the economy, there have been racist, anti-Semitic, neo-Nazi sentiments echoed within these groups. Extremists have not led, or what ADL has seen is that extremists have not led these rallies, but almost in every occasion they have participated. We also understand that there is a greater threat of terrorism in the United States because of the opportunity. Related to COVID-19 and the distractions and the very many crises that we as individuals and our leaders are confronting. So critical at this point is not to lose sight of these extremist elements and to continue to call on the administration and Congress to remain vigilant and to prioritize the threat that comes from these extremist groups, because what we saw in Charlottesville, what we saw in El Paso and elsewhere around the country is truly worrisome, and we don't wish it on any community, certainly not on the Asian American community, that right now there's such an elevated sentiment of discrimination against.
I wanted to add that I do think the law enforcement has to help the Asian American community track the hate crimes and the hate incidents, because as you said, Lisa, there's been a lot of hate online, and so we can track what is happening. The second thing I would just say is we have to hold our national American leadership accountable for using the terms Chinese virus, and we should hold them accountable. We're talking about China, but we have to hold American leadership responsible and accountable for letting this virus get out of hand and for letting racism get out of hand. They need to say much more than what they're saying against racism. Otherwise, we're all just individuals out there or organizations out there, but we need stronger national leadership. And I believe that should be the deciding point for now and in the election.
We don't have a lot of time left. I want to ask one last question of Van. He and I have been texting and talking about China's role in the upcoming election. And Van, I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to read something that you texted me last week. As China rises, we are going to have to work very hard to fight anti-Asian bigotry. We need a new vision of America that lets us celebrate having the genius of all humanity in one country. That's how we can still play our special role, even if we're no longer the richest nation or even the sole military superpower. First of all, thank you for that collective we. And can you expound a little bit on this?
Look, I think that we're asking for mainstream America to do something very difficult. Change is hard. as I always say, I've been trying to lose the same 5 pounds for 5 years. It's just hard to change, even when you want to. When you say to mainstream America, okay, you're going to have a different demographic mix of America as we move toward the middle of the new century. Your grandchildren may not look like your grandparents. That's change. When we say that not only going to have differences internally with regard to the demographics, robots might have more jobs than people soon. That's change. And we say not only in the economy, but geopolitically, the United States may no longer be the sole power. China is going to rise, and they may refer to this as China's century by the end of it. Well, you're asking for people to accept an awful lot of change in a short period of time, and change is hard. And that says nothing about, the changing gender roles and sexuality. There's a lot of change that we're asking for people. And for those of us who feel comfortable with the changes, and who feel comfortable with change, just, personality type, feel comfortable with change, it doesn't seem so bad. But if you are somebody who change isn't easy, people need help. People need encouragement. And part of what we've got to learn how to do is to call people up as much as we call them out. We're very good at calling people out. You're a bigot, you're a racist, you're a sexist, you're this, you're that. We're not as good at calling them up and saying to people in this country, we need you. We need you. We love you. We respect you. You've raised good families. You've worked a trade. You've done great things in your neighborhood. But, you got Americans who are scared to open the door, not because of the virus, but because of somebody might hurt them. Little children are scared in your country, and we need you. We need your help. We got kids in this country going to bed hungry, or living in neighborhoods where they go to funerals every other weekend for their peers. Some of them never met their fathers. We can't have the country we want without you. We bring great gifts, but we also need your gifts. And we can create a country together that the world will marvel at because of the genius of all people being all here together. But we can't get there without your help and without your part being elevated. We don't want white folks to fall down. Hell, we're all Americans. We want you to be greater. We can imagine an America where the white folks and the black folks and the brown folks and the Asians and we're all better. We're all stronger. And frankly, we get to cheat in America. We get to steal all the best people from around the world and put them on our team. So that means we can compete with China and anybody else. If we keep cheating and stealing all the talented people, we got a shot. So a big part of America rising is us stealing all the good people from everybody else's team and being able to win. So when you see all these geniuses coming from Latin America and Asia and everybody joining our team to help us deal with China and anybody else, you should clap for them. They should clap for you. We're going to win. We've got to be able to tell a different story about what it means to see all these different people here joining America's team to keep us strong and amazing. And I think if we talk about it in those terms, it gives people a permission structure to celebrate and to feel like this is not to their detriment. It's for their benefit and for their good. And then they also then want to be good. This is the great challenge I think we have. But I think we're up to it. I mean, we're right. America's great because of all these folks. And I'm just proud to be a part of the effort. And we will go through some tough times. There's going to be some tears. There's going to be some bad things that happen. There's going to be some funerals maybe. But breakdowns can become breakthroughs if we use them right. And you will not fight alone. I tell you that. You will not fight alone. That's one thing we learned in Charlottesville and everything else. We thought it was just black people going to be crying when those bigots did that, and it was the whole world crying. We didn't have to fight alone, and you won't fight alone either.
And thank you for that vision for America. That's the America that I want to live in, and hopefully this crisis will truly bring out the best in people, and that we will be encouraged and moved to want to work together. I want to thank our panel for taking the time to be here with us. Thank you for such important information and your expertise. I want to quickly talk to Asian Americans directly who are watching this. You know, what has been happening to Asians here in this country and around the world has been terrifying and devastating. But it's so important that if we want to stand up, if we want people to stand up and fight racism against us, as Stewart said earlier, we need to stand up and condemn racism of all people and be of service to other communities that are in need. And I know so many of you who are watching already do. And to those Chinese Americans in the audience who are watching, so many of us see ourselves as bridges between two countries with rich and complicated histories. But we also need to be as vocal as we are of our own government. When China commits human rights abuses or silences dissidents or mistreats foreigners, particularly African nationals during this time of COVID, we cannot be silent on these issues. We need to stand up for our shared humanity. These are times, as we know, of immense uncertainty, but we always have to remember that strong people stand up for themselves. Stronger people stand up for others. Thank you all so much. Eileen, I will turn the program back to you.